Hello everyone, this is part 3 of What If Naruto Owed Ino a Favor, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. What are you going to just lay there? Ino frowned, chucking a few kunai in Shikamaru's direction, surprised to find that he did not budge. Purposely, all blades missed him, only grounding a few inches from his arms. Shikamaru situated himself beside a tree, unnerved. Sighing, Ino took a few steps closer, ing an eyebrow. I could hit you if I wanted to, you know. She held her breath, becoming aware of just how empty her threat, beyond doubt. You don't have the guts. His eyes closed, he exhaled deeply. Again, another moment of daydreaming, interrupted. Lately, he hasn't been able to catch a peek of the clouds, Ino's been nagging at him, like his mother. He shuddered, not akin to that idea. I came here for help, Shika, feeling frustrated, Ino grinded her teeth together, the echoes of bones clashing throbbing into her ears. Che, you didn't even ask for my help for this one. The teenager twitched at the sound of her whines, as if she were winding up for a round of verbal harassment. I didn't need to ask your help. She cried out, raising her kunai in between her eyes, squinting to prepare a launch right at his head. You can't be lazy, sooner or later you have to go to a mission too, right? A sudden grin appeared on Shikamaru's face. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done with my spring break. Shika bent his N, leaning his head to the side as he witnessed the kunai whiz by his ear, onto the tree a few feet behind him. Sure you are, he commented, proceeding to smirk at her, but instead yelped at the sight of a kunai heading straight for his face, ducking quickly to find the blade split onto the tree bark that he was lying upon. The blade split a few hairs atop of his head. He scratched at his ear nervously, turning to glance at the weapon, examining it. How could that be? He thought she only had 5 of those kunai. Shrugging, he pulled himself up to his feet, brushing the dirt that accumulating onto his vest. So I underestimated you, big deal. You have no friends, Shika, you know you love having me around. Ino chuckled, placing her hands on her hips. This day was the usual for Ino Yamanaka, certainly she had grown accustomed to waking in the early morning hours, she's even had her hand at making breakfast. If you count milk and cereal as cooking, though. But it has become a routine for the blonde, to awake at the early hours and head on over to the dear old river that was awaiting her, and there would be her friend Shikamaru also awaited for her arrival, in a grumpy mood to boot. Yep, that has become her schedule for the past week now. Not to mention the entire ordeal of swimming through the bitter water. Fortunately, she's gotten better, to the point where she hasn't had to scream bee in the bottomless area of the river. As much as she wanted to let Naruto know about her whereabouts, she hasn't seen much of the loudmouth ninja. Of course, he would make it his duty to leave a few post-it notes, all over the house to mention a whole journal entry on how his day was. Oh, how she enjoyed them out of her bedroom door and throwing those small yellow stickies into the trash. But really, it was thoughtful of him. According to the sticky notes, he was busy on a mission with Kakashi-sensei and Sasuke-kun, and was to be back today. To be honest, the past week has been rather quiet, and although she would not admit it, she's been using Shikamaru as a pseudo-replacement for Naruto. She never realized just how much influence that guy has had on her. To the point where being alone was not as acceptable as it used to be. Like she used to like it. And shouldn't you be at your folks' home now? The Jonin finished, his aggravation rising. Apparently, she has not been heeding any of his words. She continued to gaze blankly at his face, to the point where he started to snap his fingers in front of her face. Huh, she said aloud, oh, folks home, why? You're not serious, are you? Shikamaru rolled his eyes, his hand shoving in his pocket to fiddle for an object of some sort. You're the only person I know who would forget their own birthday. He spoke indifferently, pulling out a small box, nudging it in her direction. Happy birthday nonetheless, idiot. Completely shocked, Ino reached for the small package. Well, I don't know what to say. You can start off with a thank you, that would be nice. No duh, she held a smug look on her face, Her digits drew small circles around the wrappings. Seriously, thank you. Embracing him, she could feel his nerves stiffen. Shikamaru was never the touchy type of friend, in her dearest opinion, and it amused her so in moments like this. Now that she pondered over the subject, how the hell couldn't she remember? A year ago, she would have made an entire list for the city of Konoha, now she could not even recall the day she was born. How strange. Thanks for the reminder. Pulling away, she began to run in the opposite direction, waving her hand behind her. I guess you lucked out. She chuckled. Pumping the gift in the air, she yelled, this better be nice. In a joking manner before disappearing into the woods, leaving Shikamaru to himself. He exhaled deeply, snapping his tongue. What a weirdo, he declared, taking a seat onto the comforting pasture that called out to him. Settling upon the grass, he lifted his sight towards the warm atmosphere, observing the ruffled clouds in the sky. Finally, time to daydream. His eyelids closing on him, he felt that a nap was in order. As Ino walked the old back trails towards the Yamanaka house, she could feel herself grow slightly nervous. It has been a while since she last visited her parents' home, around 2 months. In all honesty, her parents would never approve of even partial events that she has endured. But then again, as the old saying goes, parents just do not understand. 88,888,888,888. Well honey, I thought you would never come. Her mother kissed her cheek, smearing away the lipstick that stuck onto her daughter. Ino continued to nibble on her cake, slightly humored by the way her mother overreacted. Yeah, Mom, she said plainly, turning to smile at her father. So what's that about living alone? Is it as great as you thought it would be? He had first hoped that she would grow desperate from her lack of domestic art, for lack of a better word, and come home running. However, that was not the case. He was beginning to regret agreeing to let his daughter go off into the outskirts Konoha, no matter how close her house was to his. Course it is. Where have you been? I've been calling all morning. I know you don't like waking up early, but the phone was bound to wake you up. Ino paused, turning to glance at her mother. Her mother was quite intelligent when it came to snooping around. I was out with Shika. Or, isn't that cute? I just knew you two would realize. Mother, please, not this again. She s her fork through the piece of chocolate cake, sighing grimly. Although she knew sooner or later her mother would bring up Shikamaru, she was not quite prepared to start explaining herself, like always. For some reason, her parents were practically pushing her to get with her friend, well more her mother than her father, and it always irked her when they did that. Well, what were you doing then? Training with him. She smiled innocently. What do you think I was doing? Raising her eyebrows, she glanced at both her parents, smirking. A moment of silence wavered between the three of them, and Ino enjoyed every moment of it. She absolutely thrived in making her parents weary. Still, the moment did not last as long as her mother proceeded to speak. Ino, you wouldn't mind doing me a favor, would you? Her daughter gave her a questioning glare. Since you haven't been working at the flower shop anymore, I'm assuming you have a lot of time in your hands, right? Well, what is she, rubbing it in? She thought, internally. Currently the status of unemployment was becoming a common word in her dictionary, until her rebound. She needed a comeback, and she needed it rather swiftly. The way words scampered through the components of Konoha, people most certainly were doubting her return to being a konoiki. Okay then, you'd help your dear mother, right? What do you want me to do? Just watch over Kurenai's baby, will you? Miss Yuhi has a baby. Since when? Shocked, Ino s her hand onto the counter, leaning closer to her mother, who only chuckled at her daughter's behavior. You have yet to keep up with the times. She's been married for a year, remember? No. Completely clueless yet interested all the same, Ino leaned closer. She married your old sensei, remember? She did. Completely shocked, Ino recalled moments where she would tease Asuma sensei about Kurenai, but never thought their relationship would evolve. Wow, really? I can't believe it. Your old sensei actually stopped by a few days ago and specifically asked for you. Inoiki interrupted, tapping his finger onto the counter. He jerked his leg, sprawling them both atop the chair aside him in a relaxing manner. He seems to have a lot of confidence in you. He finished with a warm smile. You wouldn't disappoint him, would you, Ino? You know what that means, Ino mumbled to herself. What? He raised his tone, launching a stern glance in her direction. I mean, yeah, of course I would. He, she reassured, chuckling to herself nervously. By the way her father stared at her, she knew she had but no choice. Naruto Uzumaki dragged his feet into the house, sluggishly closing the door behind him. He plucked at his clothes, observing the dirty splotches of bee and grit from the entire week. Sighing, he was happy to know that a shower was in order. A nicely extended searing bath, if he was lucky. He passed through the kitchen, taking himself to a screeching halt. A few items caught his eye. There in the counter, practically basking in pure glory, was half a chocolate cake, protected by the glass container. Completely malnourished, Naruto made a mad dash for the cake, tearing the lid off before he eagerly grabbed a handful of chocolate mesh, mashing it into his mouth. He hummed, absolutely loving the taste of chocolate in his mouth, something besides stale bread which he was growing disgusted with. Even the strongest of Anbu members could not endure the anguish that was Kakashi-sensei's stale bread, that is if his eccentric sensei had even enough generosity in his soul to offer his pupils bread. The brown crumbs smeared around his lips, he buried his face into the cake, forgetting the mess of cake bits on the counter as he finished as much junk that was in his mouth in one gulp. Once the large portions were in fact gone, Naruto exhaled deeply, staring at the ceiling as he licked the edges of his mouth. Yum! He cried out, happily. It wasn't ramen, but at least it was not Kakashi-sensei's week-old bread. Finally composed with himself, he noticed a few small boxes of presents that were at the far end of the counter. Curious, his chocolate-covered fingers picked the smallest one, bringing it close for observation. He examined the pattern of the wrapping, wondering if Ino was kind enough to leave him a gift. When he did find a small tag attached to the gift, he pulled at it, leaving a few brown streaks. Happy birthday, Ino. He licked the roof of his mouth, getting at the final portions of cake. Happy birthday, Ino. Naruto scratched the inside of his ear. Her birthday isn't until, he twitched, suddenly remembering that a whole week had passed since he had last seen her. He said to himself, running to the living room, searching for the calendar that was placed at the living room table. He cried out, instinctively grabbing onto his hair, pulling it. I didn't get her anything. She's been talking about this for weeks. I promised to get her something. He continued ranting, dragging his hand down his face. That was when he noticed his cake-covered hands. He repeated, realizing that he had just coated himself with chocolate. I need a damn bath, he stated, finally, stomping his way into the bathroom, locking the door shut. Now of course it would have been heroic to believe that the clothes he had taken off were in fact from an enemy. But that was not the case. Actually, the mission was pretty easy in his opinion. For a B-ranked mission, all he, Sasuke, and Kakashi-sensei had to do was get rid of some criminal from the water country. Getting rid of him was the easy part, listening to Sasuke, however, was not. And that was what resulted in the Sasuke's B to be specific. They've gotten in a little scuffle that Kakashi-sensei had to break up. But that was how it always was when the three of them ever went on missions. He was pretty sure Sasuke had a cup full of his own B splattered on his precious clothes, too. Fair was fair, nonetheless. He breathed out, stepping into the shower, turning the warm knob all the way. Reaching for the shampoo, he pondered over the idea of how to get himself out of this predicament. After all, pretending to go to sleep would only result in Ino hopping on him in the middle of the night and demanding her present. He could admit that he did not manage to her anything, however, the very idea only implied that he was not interested on celebrating the day of her birth. Which would also entail, hypothetically speaking of course, that she did not cross his mind enough for him to care. And that in itself, was a flat-out lie. So how did that whole phenomenal rendezvous go, Dobe? You haven't talked about Sakura all week, Sasuke's words echoed into his mind. As he permitted the water to trickle onto his body, he thought of how much he didn't think of Sakura the whole time. 8,888,888,888. I better be getting a mission soon, I'm short on cash. Ino mumbled to herself, gripping the plastic bag full of groceries. She loved her parents and all, but visiting them oftentimes brought on that nasty guessing game of who she'll end up with. Why were they pushing for her to get with someone anyway? They should do the opposite, actually, in her dearest opinion. Fooling with the keys, she twirled them in her finger, stepping onto the stoop before her front door. She closed her eyes, humming a small tune in her mind, reaching towards the lock. Unfavorably, it was too early to go to sleep, but she knew that she would quickly grow bored inside the house alone. Oh well, the way things looked, she'd be severely busy tomorrow caring for Asuma-sensei's baby anyway. What she didn't know was the Naruto who was keeping an eye on the peephole, grinning mischievously as he unlocked all the security devices Ino set up. Damn, how much he hated doing that. Opening the door in a swift fashion, he watched the girl in front of him carry on with her humming, her key jabbing his abdomen. As soon as she comprehended the soft surface her keys were setting upon, she shot her eyes open, gasping. Naruto, what the hell are you doing here? She cried out, in utter shock and content all the same. I came back, duh. Before she could arrive at a response, he situated his index finger onto her lips. Okay, don't say a word, I have a surprise for you. Oh boy, she murmured, sarcastically. I told you not to talk. Scolding, he returned back to a smile. Okay, this is what's going to happen, because I said so, and don't you dare refuse. She held a squirmed expression. What are you talking about? I'm taking you out, okay. So you can't say I'm cheap and whatnot. He pushed her in the direction of the house. We're going out to get something to eat, so come back out when you're ready. Ino squinted her eyes, trying her best to comprehend just exactly what he was preparing. A dinner. That sounded like a crappy way out of buying a present to her. Fine, I'm ready. Slightly disappointed by his lack of actually getting her anything, she figured she might as well do something other than force herself to sleep. No, not like that. Go put on some nice clothes. He chuckled, shoving her into the apartment some more. Nice clothes. What I'm not wearing isn't good enough. Offended, Ino tugged her shirt. What are you trying to say, Ino, please, stop being so difficult. People say you're the prettiest girl in Konoha, I want to see it for myself. He shooed her off, closing the door for her. She held her finger, forming a reply but stopped when a few certain words sprung in her mind. Naruto waited patiently, he was seated atop a few steps in front of the house. Twiddling his fingers, he wondered how long it was going to take Ino to step out of the house. By the way dusk had already turned into night, he believed she had taken somewhere near an hour to get ready. Honestly, why do women always take the longest time to get ready? Okay, I'm ready, Ino spoke, causing Naruto to flinch. Don't do that, he paused, his curious eyes taking a hold of the dress that hugged her curves so loosely. The little buzz about Miss Ino Yamanaka being the most attractive girl in Konoha was true, but he didn't quite expect to be impressed so easily. For once, her hair was not in her usual pigtail, her long tresses reaching towards her hip. It brought out her femininity, by the way the subtle glow from the street lights shined down on her. She narrowed her eyes in his direction, still, even when aggravated she could not amend her striking appearance. What are you looking at, geez? Ino rolled her eyes, taking a few steps in front of him, finding that he did not budge from his step. She had not noticed it until now, but the clothes that Naruto wore were not exactly his usual attire. He had actually wore some sort of slick vest with a simple white shirt underneath, the cuffs of his sleeves were of course unbuttoned. She guessed that the dinner was sincerely going to be formal. This might sound slightly odd, but I'm going to blindfold you, alright. He spoke from behind her, settling the cloth over her eyes, tying a knot in the back. She protested at first, but quickly went silent as she could no longer see what was in front of her. What's the point of doing that? It's a surprise, oye, just go along with it, will you? He slowly seized her hand, acknowledging that any sudden movements would probably have him ending up with a black eye of some sort. He crossed their fingers, bringing it towards his torso. Alright, just stay close to me. Naruto then took a step forward, without much of a warning. Ino gasped, instinctively pulling herself closer to Naruto. What are you doing, idiot? The response had him laughing a moment, before he continued to walk. Taking you to a nice place. You're not going to dump me in the woods, are you? In a rather frightened tone, she whispered. Maybe. He tipped to the side, murmuring into her earlobe. She trembled under his voice, finding it to be a complete distraction alongside her balance. Naruto. No, I'm not, calm down. He shook his head, wondering just how insane their conversation must have been perceived in the eyes of bystanders. Silence filled the atmosphere, the chirps of crickets were more than apparent. In the cool September evening, the moon brought about quite the luminosity. There came a ginger haze from the street lights, followed by the shady merges of dark trees. Naruto could feel Ino's fingers tighten under his grasp, as there came a fastening of pace for him. His face flushed as he gazed at the way she smiled in pure curiosity. Although there were patches of people here and there, as they approached the central city of Konoha, he felt as if it were only the two of them. A warm surge of beef filled under his eyes, and he forced himself to concentrate upon the streets. What am I doing? He asked himself, feeling a tinge of guilt pour into his sea. Naruto could not explain the significance of her smile, and how just being with Ino in general has become a need more than a wish. Hey, Ruto, she whispered, her voice whisking with the small gusts of winds. Yeah. Slightly dumbfounded, he decided it was best to keep these thoughts to himself. I know this is going to sound stupid, but did I do anything crazy that day I was sick? She bit her lip, hoping it was nothing out of the ordinary. Taken aback by the abrupt question, Naruto lifted his head towards the sky, in an effort to evoke the memory. Sure you did, you challenged me to a duel. Number I didn't. Course you did, you're a crazy drunk, I must admit. No I didn't. Her en rotated, her unoccupied hand reaching for a soft punch. Come on, really, did I start acting goofy? I'm serious Ino, you got your kunai out and solemnly challenged me to a fight. Naruto witnessed the blush form on her cheeks. In a sudden outburst, she cried out, I blame this on you, you and your nasty sake. The slowly approaching echoes of music filled her ears, reverberating into her mind. The laughter of the public, the sounds of shoes clacking onto the concrete surface, the chit-chats of the folks around her, she could touch the romance that filled the environment. She could feel a pang of excitement hit her. Hey, my sake isn't nasty, Naruto pouted, wondering how both Tsunade and Jiraiya would respond to that. Yeah right, who won anyway? In that fight, She leaned closer to him, a rather smug expression that was fixated on her like so. He shivered, the memory of Ino's unanticipated K becoming rather clear in his mind. That didn't really count as a fight, it was more of a one-sided battle if anything. Stuttering through his answer, he hoped she couldn't see through that blindfold of hers, and see just how uneasy she was making him. So I won, didn't I? He sighed, his tongue glazing over his bottom lip, feeling his heart literally run through his ears. Turning towards the place of destination, he impulsively extended his arm to the flicker of vivid lights that flickered ahead of them. There it is, we're here. In a wicked way, he was actually relieved. There it is, we're here. Ino cringed, the sudden outburst left her startled. Yet, before any loose retorts could be shouted, her hung arm was jerked forwards. She cried out by yet another surprise, finding warm hands press against her bare back, pushing her forwards. Feeling secured by Naruto's guidance, she allowed herself to be led, where the heels of her shoes stepping upon a much harder surface, the echoes of her shoes muddled with the melody in the air. Don't panic, was the last reassurance she received from him, blindfolded. Once he gently tugged the knot from her blonde locks, she felt the firm grip of the cloth undo, unraveling in front of her. Auburn luminosity filled the room, entirely filled with people. Her mouth hung open, she observed the bunches of people whom were seated in multiple chairs. Ha! Too shocked to thank me. Didn't think I could provide a lady like yourself with a nice engagement, He leered, walking a few steps ahead, deeper into the place. I'm impressed, she blurted, following him towards a seat for two. As she sat herself onto the cushion, she folded her hands onto the glass table, seeing her reflection smile back at her. By the way he gestured at the people sitting on the next table, he seemed to have been quite familiar with this restaurant-type joint, as Ino liked to believe it was. Course you are, he chuckled, in such a confidence that left her apprehensive. I love this place. He drummed his fingers against the fragile counter, leaning back against his chair, causing the two front legs to tilt forward. They always play the best music. One thing was for sure, he was searching for something by the way his eyes scanned across the empty floor adjacent to all the tables. What are you doing? Nothing. He shifted his gaze back onto her. Say, Ino, you wouldn't care to dance, eh? He offered her his hand, across the table, sweeping his digits against the knuckles of her folded hands. She automatically pulled away, shaking her head, her locks swaying. She had a wild look on her face, so much as to push her chair back, completely embarrassed. Rose-red streaks were smudged under her glazed blue eyes, as she cried out, "Are you crazy?" He pulled his hand back, appearing rather disappointed. "What? Oh, come on, you know you want to dance, listen to the music, Ino, it's calling out to you." He wrinkled his nose, bewildered by her sudden timid behavior, but not all that surprised. When it came to the actual public, Ino was not quite the type of person to throw herself out to people, no matter how noisy she was known to be. Snapping his fingers, he pulled himself from the chair, instantly heading towards her side. "Naruto, I don't think we can dance here." She twisted her side to side, frightened at the many groups of people whom had their eyes fixated on the two of them. Ino submerged herself, latching onto the metal chair handles for support as she sunk deeper in her chair. Her dress was caught in between the tangles and mess, rising up towards her knees. A squirm expression played upon her lips, and Naruto could only stand and watch the show that was Ino Yamanaka. "Are you done?" Imagining a watch upon his wrist, he took a glance back and forth for a moment or two, his foot tapping. "No one else is dancing," she cried out in her loud whisper, one arm flaring to shoo him away. What she thought would be a splendid night was turning into some sort of nightmare for her. "We'll look like idiots." His hand then jammed into his pocket, the other extended in her direction. She paused, blue eyes lowering her gaze at his open palm. "Trust me, all right," he spoke in a low husk, the baritone intonation drove a few quivers. The jazz melody soon faded from the dance floor, following the taps of a tambourine, the notes of a piano clear in her thought. A few beats of a drum blended with the tune. Ino perked her head, a small smile forming. This had got to be about the craziest thing she's ever done. That one statement alone eased her hand reached, clasping onto the offer. It was unimaginable, the way her heart raced at the thought of dancing in public, especially with Naruto. She could feel her knees grow weak as he lifted her from the chair, greeting her with his trademark grin. He bobbed his head with the tune, snapping his fingers in his ridiculous routine. Their hands linked, she shook her head at the imminent discomposure. He pulled her towards the middle of the empty floor, where she felt wandering eyes burn on her. Completely unaware, or otherwise ignorant of the audience, Naruto took a hold of both of her hands, singing along with the words of the song, "Why do you build me up, buttercup baby, just to let me down?" He moved from side to side, bringing her palm towards his sea, utterly entranced by the sound of music, and "Mess me around. And then worst of all, you never call, baby, when you say you will, but I love you still." Eyes shut tight, she threw her head to the side, a few laughs came from her amusement. As uncomfortable as she first felt, it all disappeared by the way he exaggerated the words of the song, breaking her tension. And as she witnessed the people with a look of enjoyment in their warm gaze, she felt a silent acceptance. "I need you more than anyone, darling, you know that I have from the start." He turned her with a twist of his wrist, swiftly drawing her a few inches closer, his hand on the small of her back. He raised their folded hands, they swayed with the beat of the song, Ino attempting not to step on his fast-moving feet. His mouthed the last verse of the chorus, concentrating on the way she beamed at him, "So build me up, buttercup, don't break my heart." Naruto paused from his singing, "If you will," and took 2 long strides to the left, 2 to the right, zigzagging through the floor. Ino could not help but chuckle at the idiocy they both represented, becoming an attraction. He spun her, leaning as he stated, still embarrassed. Ino rolled her eyes, though an open-mouthed grin appeared as she grunted, "Number." She said plainly, sincerely, feeling as if it were only the two of them. He literally whisked her away, she felt the meshed emotions of flutters, jitters, nerves. Ino witnessed the confidence in his lead, and found that quite attractive. He always flourished in opportunities such as this, where the world sought nothing but to judge, and one way or another he proved to progress unscathed. It amazed her how much he did not care for opinion. Misplaced in reality, lost in his stare, Ino could no longer see a smile on his lips, but a fervent concentration on her. In fact, her feet have since refrained from shuffling to keep with his. He gave up on keeping in tune, soon stopping altogether. His hand relaxed on her back, the texture of her dress delicate against his palm. They were caught gaping at one another, equally anxious to move, speculating the line of friendship and whether they had thus far crossed it. Ino felt her heart swell in her sea, the melody of the song once again blending into another. The era of the 60s continuing on without them. He leaned a few inches closer, attempting the unexpected, but the intimacy was quickly spoiled by the wave of applause that erupted from behind them. Ino lowered her gaze, staring at the wooden floor awkwardly, keeping away from Naruto. What was it? The feeling that swirled in her abdomen, scaling to her bosom. Biting onto her lip, she acknowledged the flush on her face. A mesh of thoughts passed her. Do I like him as a friend? If I tell him, will it end? Will he look at me the same? Does he see it as a game? Well, I'm famished. Naruto cried out loudly, in his phony way, turning into the direction of their table, hoping to keep his dim-witted impulses undetected. He witnessed Ino return to her seat and stressed his sigh. He knew it was an awful idea to take her to a place like this, and if he did not control himself soon, she'd accuse him of something. Something he's unwilling to admit. Because he believed it was not true, primarily, he had hoped to have absolute adoration for Sakura Haruno. The truth was, what was he willing to give, for this take? As the menus were handed to them both, followed by a flattering remark on the dance moves, Ino kept her eyes fastened onto small print in front of her. At this rate, her hunger was deteriorating, she was more on the road to nausea. And as much as her eyes squinted in her rendition of being an Oscar-nominated actress, her actions had appeared inept. Please don't tell me you're getting a salad, she unwillingly dropped the menu onto the table, narrowing her eyes, completely offended by that comment of his, wisecracker. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means order something worth paying for. He lifted an eyebrow, maintaining his attention towards the list of foods. In a smug motion, he licked his index finger, flicking through a page, his eyes shifting onto her. And you say this because I'm a girl, right? So you automatically assume I'm only willing to eat a salad because I care so much about my figure. Although, vanity aside, she did mind what she consumed, once in a while, but by the way he was diverting this supposed conversation, he made her seem like those typical Konoha woman, Sakura's type, nonetheless. That was an insult on its own. She cracked her fingers, over her head, a rather arrogant smirk plastered on her lips. Okay then, I'll just have everything on the menu. I haven't had anything to eat all day, not to mention it's that time of the month and so, I'm damn hungry. She declared, handing him the menu, pleased by the way his jaw dangled from shock. His stunned state soon altered, however, to disbelief. Sure you will, even if I were to afford all the crap on the menu, you would never eat it all. How sure are you about that? Very. He placed both elbows onto the table, his chin resting upon his thumbs. But, since I'm taking you out for this rendezvous, I'm picking what we're going to eat. Why? Because. Naruto stuck his tongue out, hoisting his hand in the air for a waiter. And no matter how nasty the food is, you must eat it. So what? You're going to pick the nastiest food you can find. That's beautiful, kid. Just the present. She chuckled, calming herself once the waiter arrived. Her glare darted to the blonde, unsure how far he would go in his bluff, or was it a bluff? I'll get me some this, and this, he pointed to menu, which was held erect, making it blind to Ino's eye. By the way the waiter seemed to hum in approval, it happened to calm her down a bit. Hey, do you think you can actually afford it? I'm not poor, Ino. He patted his pocket. You can't buy me love, Naruto. Sure I can't, love is free, Ino. Holding on to the words, she allowed for it to linger in the air, happening to overlook Naruto's tendency to fight for the last word. So why'd you take me here, Naruto? Because I wanted to show you a good time, Ino. I thought love was free. She remarked, nonchalantly. Fooling with the pepper box, she tapped onto it with her finger, watching the bits of black plunge to the glass table, like black snowflakes. Sure it's free, food isn't. So why didn't you just show me love? Awaiting a retort, she paused when he responded with silence. She tilted her head to see that he was dumbstruck, biting onto his lip like a 5-year-old, desperate for words. It was not until a few seconds later that her words registered into her intellect. Automatically she flinched nervously, causing the pepper box to spill over, stuttering for words to launder the mess that she has verbally created. A rush of scarlet stroked against his cheeks, across the bridge of his nose. He opened his mouth, as if he were to utter a response, but hastily locked his jaw shut. Ino could feel the burning embarrassment etch into her stomach, breaking her courage to stare at him. She brought her gaze towards the spilled raven snowflakes, a few blonde curls covering her uncomfortable expression. I didn't mean it the way, please don't interpret it that way, I'm really happy you brought me here. When it came to awkwardness, she always spilled every single form of thought out onto the table, for all to witness. It was not a very good spectator sport, especially in situations like this. Man, I'm making a fool out of myself. Naruto bowed his head, his tone of voice lowering into a pure murmur. Ino, if you don't think he interrupted himself, taking a gulp of the saliva that managed to acculate. Extending his arm, he impulsively felt the need to wipe away the aura of uncertainty in her tone, but before he grabbed onto her balled fists of frustration, a gloved hand abruptly swept in front of his eyes. The space in between them was interrupted by two plates filled with some sort of cuisine. He darted his fleeting look to Ino, who shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her cheeks carried etched lines of rouge. As passed her an apologetic smile, he could not avoid the way his mouth watered by the mere aroma of delicious salty food that he literally lusted for. Ino promptly rolled her eyes, reaching for a fork, a small giggle escaping her. So what's this? Fantastic stuff. Eyebrows arched, she picked at what she could not describe. In front of her was a touch of a meal her father would conjure in his latest attempts of being a chef. Fortunately, it did not pertain to the burnt over smell. God, you look like you're going to stuff yourself. Lifting her view, she watched Naruto bring the plate to his mouth, shoving half of the fried rice into his mouth. Swallow, idiot, she cried out, kicking him with her heel, watching his expression of sweet ecstasy see short. Wow, he howled, biting onto his lip. What? I'm starving. This is real food. Even if he did explain his way of nutrition from the past week, he knew she wouldn't approve anyway. Who cares? Eat like a real person. She barked, taking a small scoop of whatever it was she had reluctantly towards her lips. Pausing, she asked, what is this anyway? Eat it, delicious, were the only conceivable words that she managed to heed. What she saw was Naruto continue to eat like a starved child, finishing the last few spoons of his plate. Honestly, it was comical watching the way he drove the poor food into his mouth, his cheeks bulging with food. Decent, she commented, finding the food rather tasty in truth. Sweet and sour all in one, something she was needing for a while. When she dug her spoon for another portion, she caught a glimpse of desire from across the table. You're not full yet. Are you kidding? You're an idiot. A starving one, my friend. Oh, what a pity, she frowned, nipping into the spoon, because this stuff, chewing softly, she lingered toward the frown that plastered his face. Delicious, man. Can I have some, then? Ha, heck no, I love this. Ino chuckled, another portion of rice hitting her tongue. Again and again, driving him crazy. Hunger splashed his visage, even a few of drool slicked his bottom lip. He ogled her seconds more, her spoon never leaving his sight. Feeling amused and abusive all the same, she suddenly gave in on the puppy dog stare from across the counter. Fine. Without warning, his hands held onto the ends of the plate. Really? He jerked, but the food remained unadjusted. Hey, I thought you were gonna give me some. The anticipation heavy in his tone, he pouted. Sure I will, I'll feed it to you, of course. Oh, Naruto grinned, daringly, unhesitant to take a seat beside her. I see, you think I'm going to be embarrassed like you were. Not really. Aggravated, she regretted ever offering him anything. So I can't be Mr. Social Butterfly, geez. Whatever happened to that? Looking past the loud, blatant emotion that spilled from her, he could not disregard what she also was unintentionally revealing either. That social butterfly persona of yours. When we were younger, you were Miss Popular. I don't quite care about that anymore. She shouted, enraged, eyes squinted. She roughly her hands onto the edge of his chair in front of her. Rather than thrust as much energy into shoving him away, she felt the nausea return for a second round. He placed his hands atop of hers, grazing it with his fingertips. I care about you, Ino. Sure you do, she blurted, surprised with the insensitive response herself. He laughed quietly, tilting himself closer to her, hands never leaving her sight. What do I have to K you to prove it to you? K. Suddenly that sounded familiar. The husk of his voice. The linger in his eyes. It all felt familiar. She felt this way before. And it hit her. A heavy blush rose under her eyes. She could feel the undetectable fractures cracking under her feet, her heart plummeting into her stomach. But that couldn't have had happened, could it? Honestly, it was simply out of the question. Ino. Naruto observed her many expressions, witnessing her convert from the laughter in her eyes to the unreserved realization. Some sort of mathematical equation scrapped and scribbled in her mind, by the way the blue orb skimmed. Her mouth formed words he could not comprehend, in her silent chatter. As if he had broken the spell that sealed her speech, she flinched, taking a glance to the left and right. A touch of rouge was draped over her cheeks. Even for a woman, she had 1,000,001 emotions he wished he could comprehend. Temptation insisted on dwelling on his thoughts, but famine was manners were not his forte, and any minute now he was going to wolf the mess of food on her plate, whether she permitted him to or not. So about that food. Are you that desperate? Unbelievable, she thought, his patience was quite as impressive as cheap cologne. She latched onto the spoon, pulling out in front of him, dangling it. Open your mouth, she sighed, her palm under the spoon as she blew at the hot fumes. He blinked, mouth agape, pointing towards the metal. I thought you were kid. The item of question was shoved into his mouth, savored by his taste buds. And oh boy did he need that. Eat, she commanded, pulling away the food, dipping her spoon for another portion. Reverting her gaze back to Naruto, she was surprised to find him absolutely still, to the point where his lower lip parted from where the spoon once was. The way he appeared, pouting, in his blank stare, was utterly gorgeous in his goofy off-the-wall way. By some means, whatever was driving him at the moment, he was patient. I don't mean to interrupt. A waitress extended her arm over the two-head, placing the bill ticket onto the table. She pressed the restaurant's menu against her her russet bangs covering a portion of her right eye. By the name displayed on her clip, Mitsumi had a nice young smile attached to her, in the girlish way only a teenager can pull off. You two are such a cute couple, Mitsumi commented, her gaze darting to Ino who avoided it, turning away, face reddening. Anyway, this is a compliment from us, we all loved watching you dance. She squealed, placing a dark glass bottle on the table, 2 wine glasses included. The waitress has one last curtsy, nodding in approval in Naruto's direction before giggling her way back to the kitchen. Did ya hear? She said we were a cute couple. Naruto grinned, reaching for the wine, eager to pop it open in between his teeth, spitting the cork aside. Maybe she's right. He seized the glass in a delicate fist, pouring the glass to the top, taking a full swing. It's even better when it's free, he mused, licking his lips. Alcohol doesn't appeal to me. Sure it doesn't. Snickering, he poured a half-glassed serving of wine nonetheless. I'm not drinking that. Or come on Ino, live a little. It's your birthday. It's bad for you. So is fast food but we all eat it anyway. He presented her the glass, content to witness her take his offer. Ino's face squirmed, the aroma of thick alcohol filling her senses. A little bit of fear, a little bit of curiosity, she took one glance at Naruto, he nudged his glass towards her, a soundless toast. She grinned boldly, a second before swallowing the glass, feeling the splash of grape and alcohol sting her tea, rolling into her abdomen. It tickled all the way down. 8,888,888. They leisurely strolled along the grass trails. Naruto turned, staring intently at her, he watched her attempt to disregard the September gusts of winds. Although it was a long process, he felt the night was ending rather hurriedly. He felt the need to hold on to the night, before the world would completely spin before him. Thank you, she fought the silence that grasped her surroundings, pausing to await his reaction. For everything, for the food, the dancing, the fun. I had quite a time. Ino lifted her chin, seeing the taller figure step closer to her. You mean that? Ino witnessed his face light up, feeling the pace of her heart prance within her bosom. They continued to take an unhurried saunter back to the house, each keeping their sight away from the road ahead. Sure it was awkward, the way the crickets chirped in their orchestra, along the blades of grass that surrounded them both. The streets were vacant save for the street lights that provided an auburn mist. Yet for once, Ino could deal with this unwieldy disposition. So what compelled you to wear that get-up? You must be thinking it's unusual because it isn't orange, right? He noted. I've never seen you dress formal, I guess. Naruto chuckled, pulling off the livered vest, dangling from his index finger. I know it's not much, but I can't watch you shiver like that. He handed her the garment, she took it without much of a protest. The small talk soon ceased for a moment, all that echoed was Ino's click-clacking of her high heels, abrasion against the concrete trails. Thank you, a whisper too imperceptible to catch. As their faithful apartment complex grew closer, Naruto could feel the tension grind between them. He could not accurately depict the disappointment that scurried through his senses, fogging his rationale. What was it exactly that he wanted? It was indescribable. Ino twiddled with her fingers, keeping her gaze away from him for the moment. His vest draped on her, a few sizes too big, the scent of Naruto filling her lungs. All too recognizable, in fact. Unfortunately, they did amble their way towards the porch of the house, somehow. Ino rubbed her hands together, heating her icy fingers as she sadly waited for Naruto to pull his key out. It took a few seconds to figure that staying outside was his full intention, as he maintained his position. She was too afraid to look at him, but of what she could not admit. Ino then proceeded to shove the key on the lock herself, out of pure frustration. Cool winds blew a few strands of hair away from her features. She tried to latch her hands onto the doorknob, but before she could pull the door open in its entirety, a hand shoved it away from her reach. Wait, not yet. Naruto lowered his tone, taking a few steps forward, inches away from Ino. He made a grab for her hands, forcing cold quivers along his spine. His blonde bangs covered the anxiety in his eyes, as he pulled her closer to him. He was at a loss of words, his wits stuttered, feeling quite woozy himself. I didn't give you a proper present. Breathless, his heart hammered against his sea, building up the nerves that accumulated within him. Ino held her mouth slightly agape, shocked by just how intimate they were. Once again, another attempt at controlling her beat pressure passed on instantly, her limbs began to tremble under his touch. He willingly slipped his arms under her torso, another tug brought the scent of her perfume closer. Noses practically skimming, he leaned his forehead beside hers, the resonance of his breathing pace reverberating into her ear. Lightheaded, of course, she mumbled, what? Her arms pushed into his, hands gripping onto his shoulders for support. Beautiful blue eyes searched for the meaning behind the figure in front of her, she could feel her sea swell with sentiment. A little bit of fear, a little bit of joy. Can I ask you something? He whispered hoarsely, she shuddered from his voice. The melody of crickets and owls were no longer present at this point. Impatience managed to overwhelm him, as he could not wait for her answer. Can I you? His mouth full of air whisked atop of her lips, his quick breaths warming her features. The request, soft and naive, lingered through September weather. Half dazed, eyes half lidded by his eluding spell, why yes, she stuttered, holding onto her breath. She panted for air, eyes widened like saucers. She could not comprehend what had just occurred, no matter how the burning of alcohol etched her mouth. Cerulean glossed orbs blinked, turning away from Naruto, as she clutched the front of his vest, scrunching silk material. Incredible was not enough to describe what had just happened. What are you so afraid of? He murmured, gently, tugging her hand. Not afraid, she replied. Before she could think of a way to avoid his remark, she found herself pulled into a tight embrace, almost to the point where her feet lifted from the ground. I'd never let anything happen to you, the solid declaration was whispered into her ear. He felt assured limbs surround him, squeezing his N. He smiled warmly, lowering his gaze to meet her blue eyes. Don't you know, you're the most beautiful woman I know. Eyes closed, accepting the waver of affection whirling in him at the moment. Even when you get on my last nerve, Naruto admitted, concentrating on the smile that lit her features. And for once, he did not feel cheated. It was not one-sided. He could touch the love in her eyes, and its entirety. Shut up. She nuzzled her face into his sea. You mean when you get on my last nerve? He was able to hear her mumbles, don't change, Ruto. Sure. He the top of her head, simply content with being able to be himself with the girl in his arms. Happy birthday, Ino. Because that was it, that was love. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.